Welcome to the Raid Season 4 guide to Mistweaver Monk. My name's LB Ninja7, your resident Mistweaver Monk, and let's get into it. You guys like when I start these guides with stats, so let's start there. First, intellect is the most important stat to look for, except in some cases when looking at specific trinkets, but we'll get there. Then we look for crit because it gives us a lot of healing and can make our mana T stacks crit, then haste, and then verse. Once again, we avoid mastery as much as we can since we don't really get much from it. This season, you're going to very easily reach our soft cap of 30% on multiple stats, so you may go over that on a few of them. If you have the option, push crit above 30% and then push verse over it. But I wouldn't advise pushing haste over 30%, although it might give you a bit more healing than pushing verse, it might cause you to run out of mana. Now, as far as trinkets go, you should always sim your character to find the best combination of gear based on what's in your inventory. But in general, you're going to find that Smoldering Seedling is the go-to #1 trinket, and it works well when paired with a great stat stick or a passive trinket like Neltharion's Call to Dominance, Broodkeeper's Promise, or one of the Union trinkets. Now on to the largest section of the video, the talents. But just as I did in the Mythic Plus guide, as we start breaking down the Mistweaver talent tree, I'm gonna blend in some of the playstyle and rotation. Now, starting off with your Monk talent tree, we have a similar defensive suite as I mentioned in my Mythic Plus guide, except we trade out Diffuse Magic for Yulon's Grace. In Raid, it's hard to guarantee value from the debuff removal portion of Diffuse Magic, and Yulon's Grace counts toward our healing meters, which is always nice. Some important talents to highlight are the Vivify Enhancing talents, which will get a lot of mileage as you'll soon see, as well as us taking the Summoned Jade Serpent statue. This statue sort of mirrors all of the Soothing Mist that we apply, so it's extremely important to make sure and summon it before you start a boss encounter, or you're going to lose out on free passive healing throughout the fight. Our Mistweaver tree is what once again houses all of our synergies. For starters, we opt into Yulon instead of Chi-Ji and take Gift of the Celestials to make it a 1-minute cooldown. This spell is the focal point of the build, and we do a very large portion of our healing during the 12 seconds that Yulon is summoned. Thus, it's important to know that our healing in a given fight will look a little something like this. Notice that there are clear peaks as well as clear valleys in our healing. The peaks are generally when we summon Yulon, and that causes our healing to ramp up and then decline back down to normal. I find it pretty important to show you this so that you understand the importance of lining up these ramping mountains of healing with moments in a fight where the boss does their most damage as well, as this will be a major part of maximizing your healing. But enough of that, let's talk about how we actually do that healing. We have 4 base spells that we are casting at almost all times. First up is Vivify, which is just a basic spot healing cast that does a hefty single target spot heal. The second core spell is Enveloping Mist, which is a very heavy hot, but it has a high mana cost and a long cast time. And the hot lasts for 6 seconds, or 7 since we're taking Mist Wrap. Next up is Soothing Mist, which is a little different. Technically, it is classified as a hot that heals the person that you target with it, but you have to channel into them in order for them to get the healing. If you move or stop the channel, the healing's gonna stop. I like to think that it tethers you or links you to that ally, since if you cancel the channel, they don't get the healing. Although this doesn't heal that target for a ton of healing, it has the upside of making any Vivifies and Enveloping Mist that you cast into that ally instant cast. This means that you can Soothing Mist an ally and then spam Vivifies and cast Enveloping Mist into them until that Soothing Mist ends, without having to suffer the drawback of their cast time. This also means that you could technically spam Enveloping Mist onto the single target, but that won't really have much of an effect since you're just reapplying the same hot over and over. However, thanks to the talent Peer into Peace, this gets a ton of value. Peer into Peace has some text that will try to limit the overhealing that you're going to do to a single target, but the important part is that Soothing Mist will follow your Vivify and Enveloping Mist target. This means that if you're channeling Soothing Mist and casting Vivifies into Bob, and then you go to cast one into Billy, it's not going to break the Soothing Mist. Instead, it's just going to jump and start healing Billy now. This also works with Enveloping Mist, meaning that you can start a Soothing Mist on one target and then cast Enveloping Mist on a few different targets, and the casts will all be instant, allowing for a quick way to spread Enveloping Mist across your raid. Finally, the fourth core spell that we have is Renewing Mist. This is a 20-second hot that we have 2 charges of, but this hot is the gas that keeps your fire burning. You see, this hot has a ton of very important synergies built around it. First, anyone that you apply a Renewing Mist to will also gain a buff from your tier set. This buff is called Chi Harmony, and it makes that target take 50% more healing from you for 8 seconds. Also, 20% of the healing done to that target will be stored up and then split evenly to allies that have a Renewing Mist on them once that Chi Harmony ends. Another extremely important synergy with Renewing Mist is the talent Invigorating Mists. This talent makes our Vivifies also heal any allies that have a Renewing Mist on them just for a lesser amount than that Vivify would do. And since you're going to be casting a ton of Vivifies, having a high average Renewing Mist count will equal more healing across a fight, since every Vivify that you cast will just do more healing based on how many Renewing Mists you have out. Another synergy is with Tear of Mourning. This talent makes it so that every time you cast an Enveloping Mist, every one of your allies that have a Renewing Mist on them will be spot healed for a fifth of the amount of healing an Enveloping Mist would do in total. Therefore, if you have 5 Renewing Mists out, you cast an Enveloping Mist on one of your allies, you basically just got an entire Enveloping Mist worth of healing for free. So already you can see that by maintaining a solid number of Renewing Mists during an entire fight means that you're just getting more value from every Enveloping Mist that you cast and every Vivify that you cast. But how can we do that? Well, the first way is to never be at 2 charges of your Renewing Mist. Keep at least one of its 2 charges recharging at all times, or you're just going to trim potential healing off of every spell that you cast. You will also get a free Renewing Mist applied to an ally every time you cast an Enveloping Mist thanks to the talent Rapid Diffusion. This Renewing Mist only lasts 6 seconds, but that can still get a lot of Vivify value and Enveloping Mist cleaving in its time. These 6-second Renewing Mists also come with our tier set buff, adding more value to every Enveloping Mist that you cast. Now, what we are doing during our Yulon Ramp windows is abusing all of these interactions all at the same time. Now that we've discussed the basics of the spells that we're going to be casting, let's break down the playstyle. I always find it beneficial to break up my raid guides into 2 sections: the ramp section and the downtime section. But I'm going to add a third called the mana section since mana management is so important with this playstyle. But let's kick things off with the Yulon Ramp section. Now this is talking about the spells that you cast before you summon Yulon, as well as what you do while Yulon is out and for the few seconds after Yulon disappears. Now Yulon at its surface is just a serpent that we summon for 12 seconds once every minute that's going to heal our allies. But just like Chi-Ji, its value is enhanced based on the spells that we cast while it's active. The spell that enhances Yulon and that it enhances itself is Enveloping Mist. While Yulon is active, Enveloping Mist will cost half mana, but every time that it's cast, Yulon will breathe enveloping breath on that ally and up to 5 allies near to that ally, healing them with a hot over 7 seconds and increasing their healing received from you by 10%. Therefore, the main goal of Yulon is to spit out a bunch of Enveloping Mist all at once so that you can blanket the raid in enveloping breath, and also have this powerful hot healing onto them. However, what makes this an incredibly powerful ramp is that each of these Enveloping Mists will also come with a Renewing Mist for 6 seconds. So if we cast a few Enveloping Mists to spread hots around, we can then capitalize on the healing bonuses and the Renewing Mist by picking a target to spam Vivifies into, blasting a ton of AoE healing from Invigorating Mists. In order to make our ramp as powerful as possible, we want to have as many buffs active throughout the entire ramp. This is why we take the talent Invoker's Delight to give us a haste buff when we summon Yulon, and that's also why we take Secret Infusion, which makes it so that when we use Thunder Focus Tea to buff a Renewing Mist, we then will get a haste buff for a short time. And finally, that's also why we take Shaylun's Gift to gain a buff from Xiaoao's Lesson. I advise reading and understanding these buffs as well as tracking them, but for the sake of this video, just understand that they're all strong and important to have one of them during Yulon to maximize its healing. Knowing these interactions, you can now piece together how your Yulon ramp should look. You're first going to want to cast Shayloon's Gift so that you have the Shao-Ao's Lesson buff for the entire duration of your ramp. You then can press Thunder Focus Tea and apply a Renewing Mist to an ally to give yourself a short haste buff. Then you press Yulon. Once Yulon is active, you can pick that same target that you already applied a Renewing Mist to that has a Chi Harmony buff to start a Soothing Mist channel on. This Soothing Mist channel will allow all of our Enveloping Mist to be instant cast, and thanks to Peer into Peace, we can cast them on multiple targets. After starting the Soothing Mist channel, you can cast Enveloping Mist on that target, then jump to another ally and cast Enveloping Mist, and then just repeat this until your Soothing Mist channel ends. As soon as that Soothing Mist channel ends, you're going to pick an ally that has a Chi Harmony buff on them, start a new Soothing Mist on them, and then cast Vivifies until your Hots or the Soothing Mist end. It's important to note, though, that as I'm casting Enveloping Mist around on allies during the first Soothing Mist of our ramp, I'm basically playing whack-a-mole, casting them into allies that have Chi Harmony buff so they receive more healing. And since each Enveloping Mist will spawn a new Chi Harmony buff thanks to Rapid Diffusion, it kind of picks the next target for you. Now you're going to want to line up your ramp so that the damage happens to your raid right before you start your second Soothing Mist channel and start vivifying. So if the raid starts to take heavy damage and you have only just started your ramp, don't panic. It is totally fine to cast only 4 or 5 Enveloping Mist and then start casting Vivifies. But any less than 4 Enveloping Mist and you're going to be cutting yourself pretty short. The reason that it's okay to cast less Enveloping Mists is because of how Invigorating Mist is actually target capped. It does its full healing to the first 5 targets that you're going to cleave onto, but the more Renewing Mist that you have out, it will heal that person for a smaller portion of the healing. You're doing more raw healing the more Renewing Mist that you have out, but the returns really do start to diminish with each extra target. But in order to not bore you with that information, just understand that this means that it's more important to start your Vivify cleaving at the right time or right as the damage is hitting than it is to cast a few more Enveloping Mists. However, if you have a few seconds to spare right before the damage hits, then absolutely go for it. Now let's use that information to segue into the downtime section of this guide. Once you get the hang of the Yulon ramp, it gets very easy and you can basically do it the same way every time with your eyes closed. The downtime is kind of the same. Since we use our Thunder Focus Tea once every minute to start our Yulon ramp, it's very important to use it right off cooldown on the 30-second mark. That way it's up again once your next Yulon ramp comes around. Once again, you really want to use this on a Renewing Mist to make that Renewing Mist last longer. That way you can use the haste buff that it gives you for a nice little mini ramp if your raid is taking damage at that moment. This Thunder Focus Tea is also an excellent time to use your Smoldering Seedling Trinket. Summoning it alongside you, casting the Thunder Focus Tea'd Renewing Mist on it to give it Chi Harmony, and then Soothing Mist, Enveloping Mist, and spam Vivifies into this little guy until it dies for massive AoE healing. I'll include a macro that makes this very easy to use down in the description below. But the core of what you're doing during this time is reacting to damage that happens or setting up for damage that might happen in the next few seconds. For any damage that hits your raid or a raid member, you want to pick the lowest health percent ally and channel a Soothing Mist onto them, and then cast an Enveloping Mist, and then Vivifies until they are full health. Then you're going to swap to the next lowest ally within the same Soothing Mist and do the same thing. If there are 2 allies with similarly low health, but one of them has a Chi Harmony on them, you choose that ally as it will always be more efficient for you to heal that target instead. Now, I say that you can set up for future damage because you can in a few different ways. One of them is simply by spreading out HOTS to maintain a solid Renewing Mist count. You can do this by casting a few Enveloping Mist around in the same Soothing Mist, but only do this before damage that you know is coming, as it can lead to a large mana consumption. Aside from that, you can also set up for future damage by setting yourself up to cast your healing spells by drinking mana tea. This is an excellent way to start the third and probably the most difficult section to master, the mana management section. Most of your mana management will come from utilizing mana tea in its most efficient ways possible. Mana tea stacks up throughout the fight based on how much mana you spend. You can then drink some of its 20 stacks to gain back some mana, and it'll give you a second of 30% mana reduction per stack consumed to all spells cast while you have this buff. A good way to understand how to use this efficiently is to look at Yulon. While Yulon is actually out, it's going to make your Enveloping Mist cost half mana, making them very mana efficient, meaning that you don't necessarily want to chug a bunch of stacks of mana tea before you start your Yulon ramp, or you're not going to be using its whole buff duration very efficiently. But actually, summoning Yulon costs a ton of mana. So just sipping a few stacks of mana tea right before you summon Yulon can give you insane mana efficiency since you'll be reducing fully priced spells. We also can reduce our spells using Clouded Focus, which is incredible at doing so. How it works is while channeling Soothing Mist onto one person, each Vivify or Enveloping Mist that we cast on them will give us a stack of Clouded Focus. Each stack makes future Vivifies or Enveloping Mist cast onto that target heal for 15% more and cost 15% less mana. This can stack twice, giving 15% mana reduction on the second spell that we cast into a Soothing Mist, and then 30% mana reduction into any further spells cast onto them. Your stacks are reset whenever you cancel that Soothing Mist, or if you swap targets with Peer into Peace though. So sticking to one ally can have insane returns in terms of mana. Now, using these two mana management tools, we can do what I like to think of as a mini game. For me, it makes it so much easier to learn a spec when I can simplify its complex mechanics into a mini game. Now, without playing this mini game, you're seriously gonna struggle with this build and playstyle, and you're gonna struggle to have mana toward the end of fights. But the game is pretty simple. You're gonna try and cast every spell in a raid with some form of mana reduction active. This means that it's not as effective to do a giant 20 stack gulp of mana tea, but it will be much more efficient if you do smaller sips to reduce the full cost spells instead. One easy example that we've already been over is to sip mana tea for a few stacks before starting your Yulon ramp sequence to reduce the cost of Yulon itself, but not sipping for long enough to double dip into Yulon's duration, as those Enveloping Mists are already cost reduced. The same is also incredibly important when thinking about Mana Tea's cost reduction and that of Clouded Focus. Taking smaller 3 to 4 second sips before you start a Soothing Mist during your downtime will be incredibly important, since the first two casts into that Soothing Mist are what cost the most mana. And sipping for too long will mean that your Clouded Focus buff and Mana Tea buff are shorting each other's efficiency. Therefore, your downtime is an extremely important time to sip your Mana Tea to make your spells as cheap as possible. Also, if you plan on swapping targets during your Soothing Mist, that could be a good time to drink a few more stacks than normal, since swapping targets resets your Clouded Focus stacks. Apart from these two passives, we do have one more way to abuse Mana Tea that I'm going to leave a link to down in the description. The link will take you to a short that I made showing a mana trick using another passive that we have that's very important to have in your arsenal. But guys, there you have it. I tried to make this guide as beginner friendly while also touching on the more intricate details for the returning Mistweavers to learn from and to practice. You'll also notice that I'm trying a brand new style of guide, so what do you guys think? I'm taking a lot more time per video to include graphics to make it as easy as possible to follow. But as always, I really appreciate your support. And if you want to take a second to click the like button and to double check that you're subscribed, it would be greatly appreciated. And while you're down there, comment anything else that you have a question about or you think that I missed, and make sure to stop by the description of this video. There you're going to find the Seedling macro as well as the mana trick link, as well as a link to my Discord where I have every bit of my UI available for you to download. There's also a link to my Patreon. I know, shameless plug here, but I have to mention this because maintaining a channel as small as mine would not be possible if it weren't for the patrons that are on the screen now. So if you want to see if there's a Patreon tier for you, then click on that link. But guys, that's all that I can pack into this one video, so I really appreciate you clicking on it, but it's time for you to go ahead and go top those meters. My name's LBNinja7. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.